Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Hope all of you are staying safe and are fine. Hi all, I'm Shama Dev, and on behalf of Spectrum Ahead, Prabha Khaitan Foundation and Penguin Random House welcomes you all to the launch of the Need of the Hour ebook, The Coronavirus, What You Need to Know About the Global Pandemic. Prabha Khaitan Foundation is a social non-governmental organization founded by late Dr. Prabha Khaitan. The foundation's activities are aimed towards betterment in the arena of education, culture, art, and literature. Through its programs, it endorses the importance of humanitarian global issues and fundamental needs, both physical and spiritual. Spectrum Ahead is a study group based out of Pune, running strong for 27 years with a member strength of 350 plus women. As a group, we are committed to the path of learning and are a discerning lot interested in staying current and relevant through talks such as these. A warm welcome to all our attendees today. This book launch is under Kitab, an initiative of Prabha Khaitan Foundation, which does formal launches of a specific book by author or authors. This is the inaugural session of an ebook. This book is about the history, evolution, facts, and myths around the coronavirus. It has been written by Dr. Swapnil Parekh, Mahera Desai, and Dr. Rajesh M. Parekh. Dr. Swapnil Parekh is a practicing physician in Mumbai and the co-founder of a healthcare startup, DIY.health. His practice focuses on reversing lifestyle diseases like diabetes and obesity. He holds special interest in infectious diseases, medical literature, and the future of technology in medicine. Mahera Desai is a clinical psychologist and medical researcher. She has excelled in academics and psychometrics. She is passionate about fitness, travel, and voluntary social work. Dr. Rajesh M. Parekh is the Director of Medical Research and Honorary Neuropsychiatrist at the Jaslok Hospital and Research Center, Mumbai. For today's tete-a-tete, we have Dr. Swapnil Parekh and Ms. Mahera Desai with us to launch the ebook and discuss their field of interest in detail. Over to you both.
Thank you so much, Shamaji, for a very warm welcome and a lovely introduction. We are glad to be a part of this launch and to share the book with all of you all and a few insights and some of our memories as we went through writing this book. But before I start, I would also like to thank Anandita ji, and I would like to thank Manisha from the Prabha Khaitan Foundation, who has given us this opportunity. Khyati and the entire team, marketing team as well of Penguin Random House, who has made this possible. Of course, we cannot forget to thank Milli Aishwarya, our publisher, who got us started with this book, and Munira Kapadia, our colleague, who has helped us through every word of this book. And lastly, but most importantly, Dr. Rajesh Parekh, who is our third co-author, without whom this book would not have been possible. So I'd like to thank all of y'all, and we are excited to be here. And I would like to thank also all the participants who are attending in, and we hope we can make the session informative and useful for y'all as well.
Like Myra said, thank you to everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all today.
Great. So I was thinking, Swapnil, right, before we start, we can just show them a little sneak peek in terms of what the book looks like. I have a print version, of course, with the printing presses being shut right now. Unfortunately, a physical copy of our book is not available, but it is available on Amazon with the Kindle app, which is available for free on any app store. It's available on Google Reads. It's available on Kobo. So here is a little sneak peek on the book. This is the book cover, very quickly for everyone to see. It's available for everyone to purchase as well. Swapnil, would you like to discuss with everyone how this book came about? Because a lot of people I have keep asking us, you know, how did y'all write a book so early on? We are still somewhere in the middle or the beginning of the pandemic. And what got this started?
So yeah, we are in the beginning of a pandemic, and while this is a new virus, for example, I have been practicing medicine for close to a decade now, been working with infections like tuberculosis, malaria, swine flu for a long time. studying epidemiology, virology, immunology for a long time, uh, medical research, biostatistics for a long time. So it becomes a little easier to kind of pick up on something that's new. It's not necessarily as new to people who've been in the field for a while. And then also it's just the passion for infectious disease. So when there was, a new virus in Wuhan, China, that we found out about, we immediately started paying attention to it. Dr. Rajesh Parikh is the director of medical research at Jaslok Hospital. So again, a very strong background in medical research. So when we started talking about how this virus was beginning to spread and how the early metrics were pointing that this was likely to be a nasty pandemic, we started writing before it was officially a pandemic, but the metrics were, going in that direction. Myra, you've been working with Dr. Rajesh Parikh on clinical research for a long, long time. And in fact, our interest in this goes beyond the book. So Mahira and I have been doing some pretty groundbreaking research on COVID-19 right now. I'm a co-investigator on a convalescent plasma trial amongst one of the other clinical research projects. And Myra is playing a crucial role helping us there as well. So I think the simple answer is we have a love, a passion, and an interest in this field. And that's why we could hit the ground running. And we've worked together as a team before.
Absolutely. And just to add, a lot of people must be wondering that, you mentioned that this is a coronavirus. It is new, but it's really not new in the truest sense that we have seen similar people who are in the medical field have seen similar fields like that. What I would like to add at this point is we have discussed how this is not the first coronavirus that humans are facing, and that we have had a history of SARS in the past, of MERS, which hit the Middle East, SARS, which was predominantly in Southeast China, and then spread across the world as well, which were epidemics, smaller scales earlier. And we have tried covering that in the book, in the history of pandemics as well. So in that, I would like to ask Swapnil, what would you feel are the biggest lessons that we have to learn from history in terms of pandemics, and how that can possibly guide us today in healing and moving forward?
Well, Myra, like you were saying, just to add on to that, there's also been SADS, which is swine acute diarrhea syndrome. And while that was a zoonotic epidemic, it was an epidemic due to a coronavirus nonetheless. And in addition, then there are 4 human coronaviruses that are in regular circulation, that are endemic. About 15 to 20% of common colds are due to the coronavirus. So, humanity has dealt with coronaviruses for a long time, and very likely in the future, we're going to face another coronavirus epidemic, pandemic, what have you. What do we need to learn? What have we learned? Not enough, but we're going to learn a lot. If you look at HIV as one of the models, our understanding of virology, immunology, epidemiology just accelerated so much, diagnostics, therapeutic options. So a lot of pathfinding research in multiple fields happened because of HIV. This virus has hit us at a point when we are really in the golden age of scientific discovery. So we're going to learn so much, and it's not just in virology, immunology, epidemiology. Of course, we're going to learn a lot there. I was at Kasturba Hospital today, and we're working on some things in immunology that are just going to blow people's minds when it's published. It's so new, so exciting. But then to come back to your field, Myra, maybe you can talk about this a little. Think about this: more than half the human population has been sequestered. Children haven't been going to school. What are the kind of long-term effects that we're going to face because of this? There's so much that we're going to learn. What kind of detrimental psychological effects will this have? Will there be developmental effects in children because of this? So we're in an unprecedented time. We're going to learn a lot. And I can only hope that some of those lessons that we learn help us, we take long-lasting and persistent measures to prevent this from happening again in the future.
Absolutely. And Swapnil, while you're doing groundbreaking work in the medical area and, in more investigative in terms of finding cure, treatment, a vaccination possibly, as the world is looking for scientists and researchers across the world. For me, the fascination has always been how this affects people more from a psychological perspective, more with my background, even with the humanities, in terms of what is the economic toll and how is that affecting human behavior. Because even in these times, as we are looking at it, a lot of the medical field wonders, saying it's so easy, in terms of taking a precaution, just stay home. Why is it so difficult? And at the same time, we're seeing tons of people, breaking and violating these lockdown rules, not taking the adequate precautionary measures. And I think it's just survival instinct over there. When, migrant workers is a discussion that keeps coming back and front. Why would they do that? Why don't they just stay put? But I feel that an essential part of a human need is not just food and water, it's also the social connection. And in a time like this, where there is so much uncertainty, there is so much crisis, people only want to just be back home with their close ones in an uncertain moment, because it provides a sense of reassurance. And people are torn between the logic of following the precautionary measures and doing what's right, and at the same time an emotional toll, where they're trying and dealing with their own emotions. And in this time, I feel all of us are vulnerable. We are all seeing and taking up more chores, more responsibilities. Routines are disrupted. People are trying to adjust, to work from home schedules. It's not possible for all. Daily wage workers are struggling. Even those who can work out of a laptop from home are struggling, because while they're trying to deal with a laptop, we have, for the first time in human history, practically over 188 countries don't have education systems running in the traditional sense today. So over 1.2 billion children are not going to school. And that is going to take a toll. You are looking at increased frustration levels, no physical mobility. And we are seeing domestic violence increasing. And in times where you're expecting people to stay home and stay shut, the vulnerability only increases, because they can't even step out or run out to, reach out. And fortunately for us, I think in India, we have had the police come forward and put a system together to reach out. Never before have I seen such a collaborative effort even towards mental health. We have telephone lines, free toll lines, where people can come in and just call in and speak to someone who's in times of need. And I feel a special vulnerable population is anyone who's suspected or confirmed to have COVID. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of misinformation out there. WHO rightly called this an infodemic way before it called it a pandemic in early February, where so much of misinformation that there's a lot of stigma and a lot of discriminatory behavior, which unfortunately makes the hardships even worse for those who are suffering and trying to recover from the illness. So, a lot of people are wondering, how long is this going to last? Of course, there are tips and suggestions I have, and I would like to share it with everyone on how you can probably try and normalize or come as close to living a healthy lifestyle through these times, so that you are more resilient and less vulnerable to any mental health distress on that front. But Swapnil, how long do you think this is going to last? That's a question which everyone has on their mind, or is this here to stay forever?
Well, to be honest, if I had the answer to that, and if I could accurately tell you how long this is going to last, then you should be pretty upset that I didn't tell you that this was going to hit to begin with. So anyone claiming to be able to tell you how this is going to play out, why didn't they tell us this was going to happen to begin with? That's not entirely true. A bunch of scientists were telling us that this was going to happen. We just didn't listen.
Do you want to say a little bit about that? How early were these warnings? We've discussed this in the book, but I think it may be interesting for some of the...
Every great disaster movie starts with someone ignoring scientists, and that's kind of how this has panned out. So from 2007, I'm not talking about in general warnings about pandemics. That has been going on since a very long time. But since 2007, scientists have specifically been warning about a coronavirus pandemic that will emerge from bats in China, and we need to watch out for that. And that has specifically been ignored. So it's been ignored for a long time. And in October of 2019, the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security ran a simulation with a zoonotic coronavirus pandemic, an epizoonosis, and it was no one took that seriously until of course this happened, and then everyone was like, oh, did they predict this? But simply, what do I think, and this is important as a qualification, what do I think based on the data we have right now, how this is going to play out? Well, it seems that this is going to last for maybe 12 to 18 months, maybe another year or so. And it's likely that after that, this just becomes a endemic virus. So it becomes a virus that becomes seasonal. What are some of the things that might determine this? How long is the immune response to this virus going to be? That's key. That's really what's going to matter a lot. So when we know that, we'll probably have a better idea. I think one of the key things to remember is that with any new virus, we should proceed with any new pandemic virus. We should assume that we're going to deal with the worst case scenario, and we should prepare for the worst case scenario. Let's say in 6 months, this goes away and we've overreacted. Everyone will be happy, right? They'll be like, okay, this went away. We overreacted, but it went away. Now imagine the other scenario, that this doesn't go away for the next year. And we all operated on the assumption that, no, this is going to go away in 3 months. No one's going to be celebrating that. I think we need to be mindful about that a little. And then you also need to think, and I'll ask you to talk about this a little, Myra, is what are the long-lasting implications this is going to have beyond the pandemic itself? So are there going to be significant changes to the way we utilize healthcare? And maybe we're already seeing that now. Like, how has this pandemic affected healthcare utilization or access to healthcare for other diseases? But are there going to be lasting effects beyond the actual pandemic itself? What do you think?
I think there are. I think a lot of people wonder whether there's going to be, when is normal going to resume? And I really don't think there's going to be normal in the traditional sense as we knew it for a really long time, or possibly ever. You know, it was an interesting discussion that I was having with Dr. Rajesh Parekh as well, the co-author. And we were discussing about how handshakes had begun a few hundred years ago, where people in the wild, when they approached strangers, put their arms out to show that they weren't carrying any weapons and that they were intending no harm or violence towards others. And very often we discuss today, in a sign of showing peace and no violence to others, we may actually have to put our hands into our pockets. And you know, these are changes that we have to be open to, and things are going to change. In terms of the long lasting effect, I think a big factor of that is going to be how we cope through these times. I'm already worried and concerned about individuals who are at home and who have drastically reduced their mobility, who are retreating and not having any social contact. Those who, they are the ones I think we're looking at longer term effects for. I feel those who manage to get, you know, self-care is most critical at this point, with no approved treatment per se. You know, we're still trying to find the right treatment for COVID-19 with no vaccination available. This is a long haul. And the more we can take care of ourselves in terms of sleep, in terms of nutrition, in terms of physical exercise as well, within the confines of our home, the better we are placed at. The more we have a routine in a day. I know I'm hearing more, and you know, the single biggest indicator of distress and psychological impact for this, for COVID-19 is sleep disturbance. Not so much anxiety, not so much anger, not so much depression, but it's manifesting as sleep disturbance. So, and I think in a country like India, where people are anyway wary and want to deny mental health concerns, physical manifestations of psychological distress is common, and sleep disturbances, headaches, restless behaviors like checking one's phone or tuning into the news constantly are signs that you need to make your life beyond COVID as well already. Otherwise, you're consuming yourself into a bubble.
I don't know. I'm pretty happy consuming myself into a bubble. Like,
You're not really in a bubble, you know.
you're right. You're right. Jokes aside, you're right. Sleep disturbance is a big issue, and of course, that can have bearing on your susceptibility to infection to begin with. My sleep rhythm, for example, has completely gone for a toss, and yeah, that's like you said. That's not even the only psychological effect, right? There's sleep deprivation, anxiety, depression, and a lot of these things kind of feed into each other. So when you're sleep deprived, you get more anxious. When you're anxious and sleep deprived, you're more depressed. Depression can present with anxiety features, and I'm sure you've been noticing this firsthand when we've been talking to patients during our clinical trial and the other research that we've been doing. Stigma is a big issue, right? I mean, that plays such a big role. So first, let's think about that diseases themselves can have psychiatric effects. So just like a virus can affect your lungs, your heart, your kidneys, it can have neuropsychiatric manifestations as well. We've talked about these a little in the book, but beyond that itself, there can almost be a PTSD, right? When you recover from this because the stigma.
Sure, especially for the survivors or those who have been to these quarantine facilities, it's not just the illness of themselves that they're dealing with. There have been some disturbing images that we have seen even on news channels where there are body bags right next to patients alongside their bed. It's not only seeing yourself who may be sick and recovering because most of the cases are mild, but when you're seeing severe, moderate to severe cases around you, the panic, the distress, I think just the sight of a PPE suit, how for children, just a white doctor's coat can be frightening in itself. I think PPE image, the sight of someone in a PPE, although it's for protection, is reinforcing the fact that there is something that you're inflicted with, which is so dangerous, which is increasing the barrier as well. And I feel that for them, PTSD is a very big risk factor. I feel, and you can talk about this more. What about all the other health conditions? We are already seeing that, whether we're looking at cancer patients, they are getting, or any other optional medical treatment that may be there, which may be necessary. Like I may want to get a knee replacement done, but it's just been postponed because it's considered elective. But that doesn't change my distress due to my physical ill health. And what happens to all of those illnesses amidst a time like this, which is getting ignored completely?
Yeah, so I think about the pandemic in sort of three phases, and the first being, and I mean you don't necessarily have a temporal distinction, in time, separation in time between these phases, but just as a illustrative concept. So if you think about the devastation that's directly caused due to the deaths because of the virus and infection, and then the devastation caused and deaths that occur because of diseases that could not be treated either because the healthcare system was overburdened. So let's say now the monsoons hit, and in the post-monsoon period, we have dengue, malaria. These patients may not get ICU beds if they're all blocked for COVID. Heart attacks aren't going anywhere. Diabetes isn't going anywhere. Hypertensive emergencies aren't going anywhere. So these patients may not get beds because of COVID. And then there's also the fact that these patients are exactly the ones who are most vulnerable to severe COVID. So let's, for example, think about, cancer patient, high risk of severe disease. They absolutely cannot have a disruption to their chemotherapy cycles. They need treatment, but they have to deal with that. Do I not go to the hospital because of a risk of infection? And do I, and then have a delay in my treatment? Or do I go there, risk getting infected and possibly not come back out of the hospital because of COVID? So these are real issues. So that's the second phase, that people are going to have real issues accessing healthcare, and that's going to cause a lot of suffering. And then the third is all the second and third order effects of the pandemic, like economic devastation, famine, mental health issues,
Hunger.
suicides. Yeah, hunger. There's going to be a global food crisis event. There are going to be famines, and that's going to cause its own issues. So we still haven't even begun to comprehend properly the first order effects, and we're going to see possibly a lot of devastation, a lot of suffering that comes out of this one little virus. It could possibly be the most significant event in, I say possibly be the most significant event in our lives, because there might be an even worse pandemic in our future. If there isn't one, it's probably going to be the most significant event in most of our lives.
And I know that our conversation right now sounds very gloomy, and a lot of people may be wondering, oh my God, is this the end? Like, it doesn't sound very hopeful. But I think we've seen this in the past as well. We've discussed it in the book. Spanish flu about 102 years ago was somewhat a very similar phenomenon. When I look at images of the isolation beds and the quarantine facilities in big public open areas, in theaters and halls back then, and we look at the situation today, there's so much similarity. Of course, we have technology on our hands, and if humanity has overcome that 102 years ago, I am more than certain that we are going to emerge stronger from this situation today. What I feel is already on our side at a more global level is we are seeing collaborations. We are seeing researchers and scientists come together like never before. Earlier we've seen within the medical research area where people are so protective about their research and wanting to be the first one to publish. Today, everyone is gladly sharing information and trying to learn from each other's experiences to move forward and faster. Vaccines, which take until now, not a single vaccine in history has been launched in less than 4 years' time. And for the first time with this pandemic, the pace of vaccine research has accelerated, where we are looking at a vaccine within months, if not a year, So we are seeing a lot of progress on that one. I feel humanity, we are seeing amidst, yes, some people being irresponsible, broadly, I think even the nation has really come together in the times of economic crisis. And this is something which I know concerns a lot of people. So I would like to share an example that we have discussed in our book. I feel history is always a great...
Myra, before that, can I just touch upon, sorry to cut you off, about
Sure.
the vaccine bit, because I think this is important, and we'll get back to the economics. I understand that there's a responsibility not to project an overly gloomy scenario, but I think there's also a difference between fear and panic. And I think there's also a difference between understanding that sometimes these emotions occur, and I don't necessarily, and panicking about them, I don't necessarily see myself as a purveyor of hope or fear, or any kind of positive or negative emotional response. I believe in giving the facts. The facts are that we don't know that there's going to be a vaccine in 3 or 4 months. If we go by our past history, maybe 1 out of every 20, 50, 100 vaccines in development actually pans out to be successful. Just so people understand this, you would have to have about 60% of the human population be immune to stop this. If you had a vaccine that was 60% effective, you'd need to vaccinate 100% of the human population. Think about how long that, even now, we haven't managed to do that with polio. So whether you have a vaccine and it's effective, and how effective it is, there are lots of questions there. I don't think we should be hoping for a magic bullet like a vaccine. We know what's time tested, right? We know, like, staying home, mitigating infection, testing, tracing, isolating, treating, supporting. These work, these are time tested, and we should look to those. I don't think we need to necessarily hold out for a vaccine, because it may not come. But anyway, I'll let you get back to what you were saying.
Absolutely. So, and a lot of, even we've written this in the book, that Dr. Mark Lipsitch has mentioned that his conservative estimates are 20 to 60% of the world population being infected by the coronavirus. And while his estimates are based on his assumptions, all estimates and predictions are based on assumptions. And just to add to what you were saying, those assumptions are based on how the virus behaves, but those assumptions are also based on human behavior. And that is 100% within our control. So if each one of us individually makes that choice to stay home, follow precautions thoroughly, we can broadly assure our own safety and that of our close ones, outside of that, there is anger, frustration, disappointment at what may be happening at a local level, what may be happening at a community level. But we can't control other people's actions. So might as well make the most and feel empowered within us. And that's the message that I would like to share with our viewers as well, that empower yourself through this crisis instead of feeling helpless and locked up at home. See what you can do with this time you have, because we've all at some point in our lives always said we were too busy to do something, to spend time with our family, to read a book that we loved, to watch that movie or play family games, board games. This is the time you have to discover yourself, to spend quality time with your family as well, or to clear out and take stock of your home and organize that possibly, to reconnect with old friends who may be lost. Today technology is on our side. Video chats have become so easy, and I think that's what we can do. And if you feel that the anxiety, the panic is getting the better of you, a few tips that always help is accurate information, as you were saying, from reliable sources. Secondly, breathing exercises, mindfulness, yoga. These have been time tested. They are helpful. And despite that, if anyone's struggling and you feel that no one's being able to understand, call in a professional. That is a mental health professional is accessible today via the phone. That is one line of work where you're not increasing your risk further. You need not meet in physical presence and you can still get help. So, and back to the economics of it, and I was saying about the history as well, that in the past we have seen that a lot of people in the US itself, there was the state of Pennsylvania, and then there was the state of, Philadelphia and the state of Cleveland. This is during the time of the Spanish flu, and both had very different approaches to deal with the economic crisis that came with the pandemic. While Cleveland waited out, closed things very early, waited to tide over the pandemic phase, the wave, and then they opened up the economy slowly. Whereas Philadelphia, on the other side, really hesitated to lock down and wished to open up too early, a similar trend that we are seeing within the US even today. A year following the pandemic wave, Cleveland was doing much better economically than Philadelphia was. So although the temporary hit may be strong in the short run, over the long run, taking the conservative measures have always proven more beneficial. And we've tried to cover this, we've tried to cover how social media has affected the pandemic, what we know about things today, how it has become a ground for research, it has become a ground for people to have one common shared voice as well. And we've also tried to keep it practical, and we have a chapter dedicated to do's and don'ts and myths about the coronavirus, various conspiracy theories that have emerged as well. And we've tried to debunk those as well. So if there's anything else you'd like to add, Swapnil, otherwise I feel it's a great time to open the floor for questions as well.
Yeah, I the only thing I want to clarify, because it's so easy to misinterpret out of context. I completely agree with you what you were saying earlier, but just want to clarify, neither of us is saying that yoga, exercise, or mindfulness is a cure for coronavirus. What we are saying is that it helps with the stress around the situation. So just to clarify that, and I think Myra did a great job of clarifying that. I think sometimes you just need to reinforce these messages.
Absolutely. And and I think the same with also a lot of the other salt water gargle and other things are more for helping you keep a healthy lifestyle and keep your immunity at its best. And none of these have scientifically been proven to prevent or cure the coronavirus.
So I think some interesting questions I'm seeing, and I'm just like looking at the order in which they came in. So I think from Rahul Rafkar, right? If Corona is going to remain for a long time, should we make ourselves adapted to living with this pandemic? Well, I think yes, we need to adjust to a new normal. That's what the WHO has recommended as well. So be ready to incorporate some of these changes into your life for at least the next 12 to 18 months. And some of these practices aren't necessarily a bad thing even for the long term, like washing your hands, respiratory hygiene, avoiding touching your face, maintaining social distance. I'm a big fan of that one. So, you know, giving people some personal space when you're outdoors. So I think some of these things are things that we can carry on. And of course, there are some that hopefully we don't have to deal with for too long. Myra, do you want to take one of the questions?
Yeah, sure. And just to add to what you were saying, you know, think of it more as physical distancing from each other, and we can still all be socially connected. And some of these changes are here to stay, and there are signs all over for that. You know, just the other day, Twitter has announced that all employees, 98% of their employees are working from home, and that's possibly a move that they're looking for, the, you know, carrying forward even after the pandemic is over. Back here in India, TCS has already announced that currently 20% of their workforce used to operate from home. They're already looking at moving that to 75% for the future. Pandemic, no pandemic. So this time is a stressful one, but it's also teaching us how to adapt to be more efficient. And I feel the more we welcome the change sooner, the better we'll be able to adapt with it and move with the times.
Okay, so I think there's another question. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to go through the questions. If you've seen something, so please answer.
Yeah, so there is a question by Gyan Prakash. How one returns to the previous normal life being senior citizens, as there are risks being high, and as such, I'm just reading out how it's written by the person. As such, they are being asked to be kept out of the society. So Gyan, you've raised a really important issue, two really important issues. Yes, senior citizens are at increased risk. They do need to take special precautions. But I also think they are at increased risk of being excluded from society. To touch upon what Myra was saying, you need to physically distance, but you shouldn't socially distance. You can stay socially connected digitally while maintaining physical distance. So some of the important things like, you know, the high contact events like going grocery shopping, activities like that, avoiding crowded areas, avoiding large gatherings. Those are things that senior citizens need to avoid. So maybe have one of your young relatives go out and get your medicines, get your food, stay in touch with your doctor, make sure you have an adequate stock of your essentials, especially important medicines. Also make a habit of touching base with someone in your family every day at a specified time. So if for any reason you're sick and you can't get to the phone, someone is immediately alerted to the fact that something could be wrong. On my website, diy.health, www.diy.health, I actually have a whole infographic on how at-risk populations like elderly individuals, what special steps and measures they can take to stay safe.
Absolutely. And like, just to add, I have a senior citizen with me at home. I have my grandmother, and what we are trying to do is take, if you have, you know, medical follow-ups with your doctors, if you are taking medications for anything, follow up beforehand rather than waiting for after, because if you're waiting for some time to pass and everything to become normal, and then you're going to get in touch with your healthcare professionals, you're increasing the chances of something going wrong as well. So follow up frequently, take precautionary measures beforehand. And when you're looking at touching base with technology with your close ones, it has been found that video chats tend to do much better than audio chats, which tend to do in turn much better than texts, you know, text messages. So as far as possible, it's not that difficult. Someone within the community can call daily to check in and probably even help guide. I see a lot of resistance sometimes with adults and senior citizens on using technology, but I think this is the time where we all need to adapt and embrace.
Mahira and Dr. Swapnil, if I can bring some people on audio, maybe we can start with Mr. Bharat Kumar. He has asked us some questions. Is he available on the chat?
Yes,
Mr. Bharat Kumar?
Yes.
I think I see two people who raised their hand. Geeta and Aarti have their hands up in the... chat.
Right now, Mr.
Can the admin?
Uh,
We can.
Okay, can we move on to the next?
Geeta.
Yeah, yeah, Geeta Havaldar. Unmute. Can you unmute her? Geeta Havaldar, you are online. Can you?
But I haven't asked any question. No.
Go ahead, Geeta. Geeta. She's gone on mute. Anandita, can we have the
Yeah,
next
Nalini,
person?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Go ask your question quickly.
No, I haven't asked any question.
Oh, you haven't? You raised your hand. That's why.
No.
Okay. So go on to the next person. We have Abha Gokhale. Can we have Abha Gokhale?
Am I audible? I just needed to check that.
Yes,
Yeah.
you are. We can hear you.
I
Go
have
ahead.
questions. One is, what are the challenge?
Oh, damn. 1 second. We'll just give Abha 1 second. Huh? Abha, go ahead. Can you start?
I'm audible.
Yeah, now please
Yeah.
go. Yeah.
Okay, so my first question is, since all of y'all are in the confinements of your homes, what were the challenges faced while writing the book? Because it does take some amount of research, or like going and talking to specialists. Even y'all are specialists, but going and talking to other sources. I mean, what are the general challenges faced while writing the book? Or like coordination?
I wish I was confined at home. I wish I was. I'm unfortunately not confined at home. Like I go to infectious disease hospitals for work. But I joke about this whenever the police stop me and they're like, "Why are you outside?" I'm like, "Yeah, just send me back home. Tell my boss like I have to stay at home." But yeah, we did face some challenges. The most important one being that this is such a new pathogen and such a new virus that a lot of the information about it is incomplete. And how we address that challenge is we've tried telling a story about what got us here, where we are now, and where we might go in the future. And I think one of the quotes by Karl Popper, and we've actually included this in the book, is our knowledge is finite, our ignorance is necessarily infinite. So that's always important to remember, that while we may provide information, it's an evolving area, and there's going to be a lot of new information that comes out.
Yeah, just to add, like, I think time was another battle for us as well. With the evolving time, when we started writing the book, it was around in January, early February, and we were looking at writing the books, I think, within a few weeks, and it eventually took 8, because midway through we had to there was new research being published, across all the journals, and to update that, to keep ourselves and to keep constantly revising the book, I think has been a challenge. And we, just to add, interestingly, we all 3 worked on this book remotely from the confines of our homes. And I don't think, Swapnil, we never saw each other until the first draft of the book was ready. Each of us worked on it independently and then just put it together, and it somehow came together well, thankfully, with Penguin.
Abha, you had your second question. Do you want to ask?
Yeah, what about the idea of the book? Because we've only heard people writing articles and maybe nothing else. It's not turned fruitfully into a book or something. What incepted into the idea of making it a book?
Myra, why don't you take that one?
Okay. So somewhere early on the 31st of December, actually, was when Wuhan announced to the WHO that there was a new virus that they were looking at. We got closely interested in it somewhere around the 20th, 22nd of January, when China announced the city of Wuhan shut, which housed 11 million people. And that's what really raised our eyebrows, because that was the largest ever quarantine in human history until that point. And that's when we knew that there was something big, there was something which was going to travel quickly, with air travel being so freely, there. And that's when we all wondered that possibly we're looking at something like this sooner or later coming to India. And we work at Jaslok Hospital and Research Center in Mumbai. And we said, what are we going to do if a patient like this walks in to the hospital? And how are we going to manage it and protect the patient as well as other patients who we have, as well as our healthcare staff? So Dr. Rajesh Parekh, being the Director of Medical Research at Jaslok Hospital, we all got started in writing a protocol for the hospital to handle a pandemic situation like this. Back then, we didn't know it was a pandemic, but if such a situation were to arise, we were trying to prepare for it. At that point, his friend, Millie Aishwarya, who's also the editor of Penguin Random House, contacted him, and they had been in touch regarding writing a book over other topics which hadn't been finalized. And they casually were having a conversation, and that's when she sparked the idea of why not write about the pandemic, since we were already in the midst of research at that point. And that got us started. Dr. Parekh was nice enough, I think, to get Swapnil and myself on board, and that's how we got started, really.
Thank you.
Okay.
I hope we can move on to
Yeah.
the next. We have time. Thank you so much, Abha.
Yeah, sure.
Can
Sure. Thank you.
any Shalini Mundara or is
So if it's okay with you, Shama, I'm seeing a lot of interesting questions from a medical lens in the chat. Is it okay with you if I pick?
Go-
Like, I think they're
go ahead.
impactful.
Yes.
Okay, so there are
because
two questions I think are important. The one I think Myra should address. It's about how to help. If you go to the questions, Myra, it's by Joita Bose. It's about children and how they can manage in this difficult time. I'm going to answer a question by Swaran.
Since you are on right now, why don't you just first answer the question?
I
Swapnil,
think
Dr. Swapnil.
Myra would be better to address that.
No, the other
Myra, why
one.
don't you? Okay.
Relevant to you.
When you talk about mortality rates, Swaran, when you talk about mortality rates, is it with or without treatment? What are the mortality rates for senior citizens? So when we talk about mortality rates, we can talk about them broadly, as in general, what's the overall mortality rate? And then we can talk about mortality rates with certain treatments for different groups like diabetics, hypertensive, senior citizens. So unfortunately, the elderly do have a higher mortality rate. Just something I want to explain about mortality rates. Mortality rates this early in a pandemic are difficult to know accurately. When we look at the mortality rates, it's essentially the number of people who've died compared to the number of people who've been infected. But right now, most of the people we are seeing and diagnosing as cases are people who are actually presenting with severe symptoms. A lot of the people with mild infections or asymptomatic infections are being missed. So the mortality rate can appear a little higher. Or there are difficulties basically in accurately knowing the mortality rate this high in a pandemic. What we do know, and this is again subject to revision when we get more data, is what we call the infection fatality rate is probably somewhere between 0.5 to 1%. That means 0.5 to 1% of people who get infected may not make it. That's what we think right now. In terms of with specific groups like the elderly or diabetics, hypertensives, this could be much higher. It could be, as high as 10% in some cases. So it's not the same across groups. I hope that answers that.
Yeah. And I'll just take the question on how do we manage children, and what about stress levels within children? Stress levels within children, identifying that is very critical. They present quite differently as well. Children more likely are going to get irritable. They may throw temper tantrums. You may see them regressing to behaviors which they've already overcome as milestones. So if you're seeing bedwetting occurring when your child has already overcome that phase, then there are signs that the child may be anxious, the child may be stressed and needs to be addressed to. How does one address such an issue? Again, keep open communication. Where children understand and they are very, very perceptive. So try keeping the language simple, but honestly communicate to them the situation that they are in. And that's going to be helpful. They may have questions, so keep an open dialogue and try to answer them as best as possible. Hopefully the book may be one resource where you can look at understanding what is going on in simple layperson understandable language. That's, I think, something we've really aimed for as well, to keep the language simple, to make it relatable to everyone. And like Swapnil was saying, we try to keep a story going throughout. Another thing which I feel is crucial for children to watch out for is, again, their sleep routines. If they are throwing more temper tantrums, please do not get irritable. Include them. They have more free time than they did. They may not be able to communicate in the traditional sense with their friends as well. So allowing them to use technology to connect with their friends would be helpful, and keep a routine for them. I feel routines are most critical, and the more you engage your children, the more protected they are from any ill effects. If you're worried, if you are anxious, if you're panicking, if you're irritable, the child is only likely to see that and feel the same emotions themselves. So I think first manage yourself and then watch out for the children as well.
There's another
Okay.
question.
Do we have time?
Yeah, so I think I saw another
Yeah, Dr.
question.
Swapnil.
There's a
Yeah, go ahead.
question. What special message is there in the book which can prevent COVID-19? This is important. All the information you need to stay safe, protect yourself, not get infected, is freely available from the WHO, the CDC, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. There's a lot of inequity in healthcare access, and we don't really want to contribute to that. So please don't think that you need to buy this book to stay safe. You can find all this information from expert sources online. What we have done is, this is such an important global event and teaching moment about health in general. So that's where we came from this book. So all these special information to protect yourself, it's what the WHO has been saying from the beginning of this thing. And you can go onto their website, Twitter, Facebook. You can sign up for their WhatsApp notifications, and you can learn all about how to stay safe.
Great. Ananta, do we have time for more, or we have to wrap up now? Please wrap up. Okay. I know this topic is such that we can go on and on, but on a closing note, if you can, Dr. Swapnil and Mahira, if you can quickly, there's one takeaway for you that's most closest to you as a takeaway from your book. What would you take away from your book? Dr. Swapnil and Mahira then. Closing words.
I would say that there is a great amount that we can do if we act together out of compassion and from a place of science and kindness. And that's really what we need to do. We can't let events such as these divide us. We need to come together in spirit, not physically. We can't let events such as these, we can't let them make us react out of fear and emotion. In events such as these, in fact, we need to react. It's even more important that we react from a place of evidence. So that would be my takeaway message, that in times such as these, we need to turn to science and kindness.
Absolutely. I'm just going to add on,
Great.
I think it's a great message there. What I'm going to say is that in these times, no one is invincible. And at the same time, fear and panic does not help either. We need to find a way to respond to the situation rather than react to the situation. And the very fact that we have viewers who are in on this chat today tells us that you're here to be informed, and that's a great sign. The first step is protect yourself physically and mentally. And the second step is, once you've taken care of your bubble, you want to go there out there and reach at a personal level as much as you can to help your community. So whatever little way you can do, a lot of people I know do not believe in donating money. There are always people you can give supplies to. You can also just take care of your co-workers, employees, even if it need not be monetary. You can just make a phone call to check in on people, to care about them, and that's also an act of kindness. Any altruistic behavior also is self-lifting through these times. And like Swapnil said, there's no doubt that we are going to get through this time. Let's hope that we all emerge stronger and wiser.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your work with us today. That was a really informative session, and thank you, Dr. Swapnil and Ms. Mahira Desai. Thank you all to the attendees who have plugged in and been with us for the whole hour. And thank you, Prabha Khaitan Foundation, for bringing informative sessions like these in trying times. And all the best. Stay safe. Each of you stay healthy.